Shakespeare, during his life, never claimed that he had written any of the plays himself, and when he died absolutely unremarked. No one took any notice of his death, which was unheard of.
The body of William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon was buried here in Holy Trinity Church, in a grave that does not bear his name, only an inscription begging the sexton not to move his bones.
Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones.
It's the relative lack of hard facts about this man's life and the seeming incongruities between the known history of Shakespeare of Stratford and the style and content of the works traditionally attributed to him which has stirred the great authorship debate, a continuing saga of intrigue, plot and counterplot into which eminent scholars and devout dilettantes have become embroiled. As well as Mark Twain, Walt Whitman, Disraeli, Otto von Bismarck, Charlie Chaplin, Orson Welles, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Lord Palmerston have all had their doubts. Malcolm X was convinced that Shakespeare didn't exist. Henry James once said,
I am sort of haunted by the conviction that the Divine William is the biggest and most successful fraud ever practiced on a patient world.
And Sigmund Freud,
I no longer believe in the man from Stratford. It is undeniably painful to all of us that even now we do not know who was the author of the comedies, tragedies, and sonnets of Shakespeare.
Over the last 200 years, there have been some 64 claimants to the authorship of the Shakespeare canon, and to this day, hundreds of seekers after the true bard continue to sift for evidence and to win new converts to their cause. What no one, or almost no one, disputes is that between 1593 and 1623, 37 plays, 154 sonnets, some shorter poems and 2 long narrative poems were published and attributed to A. William Shakespeare. What is also agreed is that around this time there lived a middle-class Stratford merchant named William Shakespeare. The traditional belief, a belief which has spawned a huge tourism and academic industry, is that the two men are one and the same.
It can't be denied, of course, that those of us who are deeply involved with Shakespeare have, as it were, a vested interest in believing that Shakespeare of Stratford wrote the plays. But that doesn't mean to say that he didn't write them. I can only say myself that I would retire immediately if anybody convinced me rationally that Shakespeare was not the author of these works.
Orthodox believers in the authorship by the man from Stratford, like Professor Stanley Wells, are known as Stratfordians, and the Stratfordian version of Shakespeare's life has been pieced together from contemporary documents.
The misfortune is that the things we know are not the things we'd really like to know. What we don't have, regrettably, is the really personal information that we'd all love to have. We have no love letters from Shakespeare. We have no diaries. If only we had some of these personal documents, we would feel much more in touch with Shakespeare, with the man himself.
A man called William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon, son of John Shakespeare, a middle-class glover, wool dealer and moneylender, was baptized on the 26th of April 1564 in the parish church of Holy Trinity, Stratford. His birth date is traditionally assumed to be 3 days before that, on the 23rd of April, St. George's Day. He's assumed to have attended the King's New School, the Stratford Grammar School, although the relevant pupil lists are missing, but we know that he did not go to university. In 1582 he married Anne Hathaway of the neighbouring village of Shottery when he was 18, and she 8 years his senior, and pregnant with their first daughter, Susanna. In 1585, twins, Hamnet and Judith, were born, although Hamnet died in childhood.
After that, there's a considerable gap in our knowledge of Shakespeare's life, a gap which is often known as the lost years. There are one or two legends about it, particularly a late 17th century story that he was a schoolmaster in the country. Not implausible, but not certain.
In 1593, the poem Venus and Adonis, the first work published under the name William Shakespeare, appeared in London. By 1594, a man called William Shakespeare was known to be a member of the theatrical group called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and he became a shareholder in the Globe Theatre. Flimsy quarto editions of plays performed by the Lord Chamberlain's Men bearing the name William Shakespeare began to appear. But by 1597, at the age of 33, William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon had become prosperous enough to purchase a new place, the second largest house in Stratford. Over the next 10 years, the name William Shakespeare became synonymous with popular theatre on the London stage. In March 1616, the Stratford man made a will, a draft of which still survives. In it, he leaves no books and no manuscripts, and 1 month later, he died. It was 7 years later, in 1623, that the first folio edition of the collected plays of William Shakespeare appeared, complete with a now famous engraving by Martin Droeshout. In a memorial poem to Shakespeare in the folio, the author Ben Jonson refers to the sweet Swan of Avon, and Leonard Digges to Thy Stratford Monument. And around the same time, a monument was indeed erected above the nameless grave in Holy Trinity Church in Stratford, which celebrated the Stratford man as the equal of Virgil and Socrates. The monument and the first folio are the only two pieces of evidence linking William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon with William Shakespeare the author, and they're both posthumous.
I think the accident that all the evidence about Shakespeare of Stratford being the playwright derives from the few years following Shakespeare's death has certainly given fuel to the anti-Stratfordians in their campaigns designed to prove that Shakespeare was not Shakespeare.
The anti-Stratfordians begin their attack by drawing attention to that anonymous gravestone.
It's very surprising that when Shakespeare died in 1616, his name was not even put on his tombstone.
Why no name on this stone? Well, I don't know. It is a bit of a mystery, I think. It may be partly because the stone is so close to the monument that they are automatically associated. It's conceivable, isn't it, that perhaps there was more of an inscription on it that's been covered up or curtailed in some way. Otherwise, I have no explanation for this rather unusual fact, certainly, that there's a gravestone without a name.
The grave may be a puzzle, but the first folio, with its reference to Stratford and to the Avon, would seem to provide an indisputable link between Shakespeare the author and Shakespeare of Stratford. For generations of anti-Stratfordians, however, the implications of the book and the portrait have proved far more ambiguous.
I believe that the first folio is a memorial to whoever Shakespeare was. It's a tribute to the man and a sign of the respect in which he was held. But it's certainly not a monument to William Shakespeare of Stratford.
Some theorists believe that William Shakespeare of Stratford acted as a paid frontman during his lifetime, others that he was picked for the part after his death. Both possibilities relying on the belief that the folio is part of a conspiracy which has left clues for later generations to unravel.
The first folio was not only a Masonic publication but a cryptic one, and the memorial poems to Shakespeare are really cryptic poems, and the Droeshout engraving is a cryptic engraving. It doesn't represent a particular person at all. It just represents a man whose face, if you look at it very carefully, has a kind of mask on it. You can see the line at the chin, and it represents him with two left arms, as I have established. And that means, cryptically, that he is a left-handed author. In other words, he is a pseudonymous author.
The Droeshout engraving is not a particularly good picture. If people see it as portraying somebody with two left arms, I would ascribe that rather to inadequacies on the part of the engraver than to any mysterious attempt to conceal a message and to suggest that somehow if you've got two left arms, you're necessarily somebody other than the person you're portrayed as being.
Since there are no portraits of William of Stratford drawn during his lifetime, his precise physical characteristics remain open to question. In New Jersey, USA, Dr. Lillian Schwartz, a computer graphics expert, who famously claimed that the Mona Lisa was in fact Leonardo da Vinci, has been analyzing the Droeshout engraving and comparing it to portraits of Shakespeare's contemporaries.
I was struck by the similarity of the eyes of Elizabeth. They were just staring out at me. I just felt, and I hadn't even thought of the Queen for this, even though she was of that period. I have the Droeshout, the folio image on the right, and made a cutout of the face, made it transparent so that I could overlay the features of Elizabeth. And you can see that the eyes match exactly, and the jawline, which is a very important part of the analysis. You cannot see on top of Elizabeth, but here is the mystery line, which is clearer over here. This extra line is referred to as the mystery line, and sometimes thought of as a mask. One good way to check proportions in the face is to take cutouts. For example, a cutout from the folio image and move it across to the Queen's face, and if you watch very closely, it's really quite a remarkable match. When you line up the center of the pupil, the iris, you can see that the lower lid and the upper lid are just continuation with even the shadow under the eye. The eyebrow, of course, has been changed because we're changing this face into a more masculine face. Now, if I were to take just a big chunk out of the Droeshout engraving right through the center of the eye and move it over, you would, of course, find the position, and you can see how the features just line up, even with the shading around the eyes as well. The mouse is moving a little bit. And this is a good example of how the head began to grow out. This contour, of course, is wrong because the head was elevated and made larger. But the incredible thing is even following the line of the shading that would be on the nose as well.
Dr. Schwartz's research confirmed that in the 17th century, an official face pattern of Queen Elizabeth I was supplied to all artists' studios, including that of Gower, her portrait painter.
It could have been intentional, or it could have been accidental that this pattern was available, and he used it to start a face that would be a feigned portrait to accompany the folio publication.